At a family dinner, my dad said, "Bennett, your share is $3,500 because you're single." After he said that, I just smiled, thinking there must have been some misunderstanding. But then, as the reasons he gave started to make less and less sense, I didn't argue. I quietly packed my things and left. Follow along with my story and tell me if I was wrong for refusing to pay the $3,500 my dad asked for. Hello everyone. My name is Bennett. I'm 30 years old and currently work as an operations manager at a logistics company with branches across 6 states. I live alone in a small apartment on the 15th floor in Midtown, Phoenix, Arizona. I bought it exactly 1 year ago. It's not very big, not particularly luxurious, but to me, it's the first place where I felt like I had the right to breathe the way I wanted, live the way I chose, and not have to share anything with my family. I used to live with my parents for quite a long time. It would take a few months to help them settle after retirement. But then time stretched on. Financial pressures kept piling up, and the feeling of living in a space where everything was expected, but nothing was shared gradually wore me out. One night, after a heated argument, I decided to leave. That night, I packed my things in silence and drove myself away from the house I had grown up in. And even now, I'm still grateful to myself for being clear-headed and brave enough to walk away. If it hadn't been for that night, I probably would have stayed stuck in an endless cycle of obligation and emotional exploitation disguised as family love. Because of that decision, 3 years later, I got my apartment. And honestly, up to this day, I have never once regretted it. To help you understand why I used to live with my parents, let me take you back to how it all began, starting 6 years ago. At that time, I was 24, 2 years into my career, earning about $60,000 a year after taxes. To make commuting easier, I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in Phoenix that cost $1,200 a month. Life back then was pretty stable. I worked during the day, read books in the evenings, and occasionally went out for coffee, and honestly, during that period my life felt peaceful. But that peace was shattered by my parents one afternoon in May, nearly 6 years ago. That day, I finished work at 5. After parking my car, I was walking into the lobby when the security guard called out to me. I walked over to the security office and froze momentarily when I saw my parents sitting inside. The atmosphere in the room was heavy in a way I can't quite explain. The guard told me they had arrived around noon. He had offered to call me, but they refused. They said they wanted to wait. And they had been sitting there for hours, next to 4 large suitcases on the floor, like everything had been planned well. After hearing that, I paused for a second. I wasn't panicked, but I wasn't comfortable either. My parents had shown up unannounced. Once I understood what was going on, I shook the guard's hand and thanked him, then took my parents up to my apartment. And as soon as the door closed behind us, my life completely changed. After we got to the apartment, my dad spoke before I could ask anything. He looked me straight in the eye, his voice low and steady. He said, "Bennett, your mother and I have nowhere else to go, so we came to you." I didn't respond. I stood there, quietly looking at him, waiting for him to say more. And then he began to explain. 2 years earlier, both of them had mortgaged the house and borrowed additional money from outside sources to invest in land development in Florida with my cousin Adrian. The project later failed, and they lost everything within the first 11 months. In the following months, they tried to find ways to keep up with the bank interest payments, but they couldn't manage it. Eventually, the bank sent a notice that the house would be repossessed. Ultimately, they were forced to put the house up for sale to pay off the loan interest and the principal, hoping not to lose everything. After all, they only had $30,000 in cash, just enough to settle the outside debts. Now, they only had $5,000 left in their bank account. After hearing my dad's story, I didn't know how to react. My ears rang because I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Even by the lowest estimate, that house was worth nearly $500,000. And now they had nothing but $5,000 and a statement that they had nowhere else to go. Right then, I asked them to give me Adrian's phone number. But my dad shook his head and said Adrian had lost even more than they did, so calling him wouldn't help. And at that moment, I believed everything he said without verifying it. I don't know if it was how he told the story so sincerely or if it was my mother's tears. About 3 minutes later, after I had calmed down, I asked directly, "So why are you here now? What do you want from me?" My mom answered immediately without hesitation as if the response had been prepared. She said, "Can we move in with you? We have nowhere else to go." After she said that, I was silent for a few seconds. The first thing that came to my mind was why they hadn't gone to Travis, my older brother, instead of coming to me. So I asked, straight out, "Why didn't you go to Travis?" Immediately, my mom responded, her voice now slightly unsettled. She said Travis had his own family, and he and his wife struggled to keep up with rent and raising 2 kids. Then she added, "We're getting older, and it's not convenient for us to live in a house with young children." After hearing that, I didn't beat around the bush. I said no. I told them, "My apartment is too small. There's no way we can live together. You still have $5,000. You can rent a place like mine and then find jobs to support yourselves." That's when my dad spoke up. He said, "Your mom's health isn't what it used to be, so it's just me who can work now. And with a $2,000 monthly salary, we won't last more than a year if we rent a house or an apartment." The room went quiet again. I got up, walked into the kitchen, poured 3 glasses of water, and returned. About 10 minutes later, I finally said, "I need time to think, but for now, I'll pay for a room at a budget hotel for you to stay temporarily. If that's okay, we'll go now. If not, I'll have to ask you to leave." After I said that, the room felt like it froze. But faced with how firm and clear I was, they reluctantly nodded. And that night, I got them a room at a hotel near my apartment. Sitting in my apartment that night, I still couldn't believe what happened. Inside me was a battle between emotion and logic. My heart wanted to help them, but my mind said no, because even after all these years, I still couldn't forget what had happened and how my parents had treated me in the past. I remember the years when I was a kid, always standing behind Travis, my older brother. He was 4 years older than me, and since we were little, he had always been our parents' favorite. I had to use his hand-me-downs for everything, from old clothes to toy cars and action figures. Anytime there was a new toy, Travis got to play with it first. When it got worn out or slightly broken, that's when it was passed down to me. Whenever I asked why, my mom would explain that we didn't have much money, so we had to be careful. And just like that, I grew up always using what had already passed through someone else's hands. Not because I didn't deserve something new, but because I was taught to get used to it. As I got older and our family's finances improved, my parents bought me new things and even threw me birthday parties. But it still didn't compare to what Travis got. I had a cake, but he had a whole party. I got a new toy set, but he got a camping trip with friends. The gap wasn't as wide as when we were younger, but I still always felt like I came second. Then, when we both turned 18, things became even clearer. My parents were willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars on Travis's college education. But 4 years later, when it was my turn, they gave me just enough to cover tuition. Everything else I had to handle on my own. I remember they sat me down and explained gently that their financial situation had changed, and they could only afford the school fees. The rest I'd need to figure out myself. I didn't argue, I just nodded. But deep down I felt sad, because I clearly remember 4 years earlier they bought Travis a new laptop, paid him to live in a nice dorm, and gave him a fixed monthly allowance. I never brought it up, but I saw it all. Still, even though they always favored Travis, there were moments when they touched my heart. When I was 16, I came home late after working a shift. My hands were numb from the cold. My dad didn't say a word. He walked into the kitchen, turned on the hot water, and set a basin in the sink. He looked at me and said, "Soak your hands. If you leave them like that, the joints will ache." I remember those words because it was the first time he noticed my discomfort, even if it was small. There was another time during my first year in college. I had a high fever and was stuck in my cheap student rental, unable to eat or move much. On the second afternoon, my mom suddenly showed up at the door. I asked why she came. She said, "You haven't been answering my messages for days. I got worried and came to check on you." And maybe those moments were what tore me apart the most. Because if they had been completely cold, it would have been so much easier to walk away. But now they had come to me, hoping I would help during the most challenging moments in their lives. And honestly, I didn't know what to do at that point. Around noon the next day, I had made up my mind. But to ensure they weren't lying, I called Uncle Thomas, our old neighbor who lived near my parents' house. He confirmed that my parents had indeed sold the house. Before the sale, bank staff had come by, and even people from a loan shark had been seen standing at their doorstep. After hearing that, I thanked Uncle Thomas and hung up. I felt a wave of relief. At the very least, my parents hadn't lied to me. That afternoon, after work, I stopped by the hotel where they were staying. When I met them, I told them I had decided to help. I would look for a bigger apartment where we could live together. But I had one condition. I would pay the rent, but they would be responsible for the living expenses. That meant groceries, utilities, and all the small day-to-day costs. And to do that, both of them would have to work. When I made that proposal, my dad went quiet for a few seconds, then shook his head. He said, "I'm 55 now. It's tough to find a job." After he said that, I looked at him straight and answered without hesitation. I said, "That's up to you. I can't spend $4,000 every month to cover everything. If you don't want to do heavy labor, plenty of lighter jobs still pay $1,500 to $2,000 a month. Choosing the right job is your decision. But you must share the responsibility if you want to live with me." And after nearly 5 minutes of silence, they nodded in agreement. 1 month later, we moved into a 3-bedroom apartment within the same complex where I had been living. Luckily, the unit was part of the same property management as the 1-bedroom I had rented. Since I was a long-term tenant who always paid on time, the landlord agreed to let me transfer the lease without any early termination penalty. That saved me a good amount of money, and more importantly, it saved time so I could get everything settled as quickly as possible. And then nearly 2 years went by. To be exact, 20 months passed. Each month, I paid the apartment about $2,200 in rent. My parents cared for everything else like utilities, groceries, and daily expenses. We divided responsibilities from the beginning, and I stuck to my part. Still, there were a few months when I gave them a little extra. My dad was working at a distribution warehouse. The job wasn't overly physical, but it wasn't easy either, especially for someone who was 55. As for my mom, she couldn't work. She had some long-standing health issues. I thought everything would stay peaceful just like that, until the day Travis, my older brother, moved in. That was when things started to fall apart. I still remember that day. It was early June, almost 4 years ago. When I returned to the apartment after work, I was surprised to see Travis, his wife, and their 2 kids sitting in the living room. At first, I assumed they were visiting or stopping by to see our parents. But then I noticed nearly 10 big and small suitcases lined up along the wall next to the sofa. I immediately asked, "Is your family moving in here?" Before Travis could answer, my mom cut in. She said, "Travis and his wife just lost their jobs. They're having a tough time right now, so they came here. We're only letting them stay for a little while." After she said that, I followed up with another question. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" No one responded. The whole room went silent. I spoke again, this time firmly and clearly. "I disagree with this. Please find somewhere else to go." At that moment, Stella, Travis's oldest daughter, who was only 5, looked up at me and said, "Uncle Bennett, can we stay here? Mom and Dad don't know where to go now." That one sentence hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Not because I felt sympathy for Travis. Not because I felt guilty toward my parents. But when I looked at that 5-year-old girl standing next to all that luggage, I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. So I nodded. I didn't say how long they could stay. I didn't explain anything. I just nodded and went into my room. At that moment, I had no specific plan. I thought they'd stay for maybe a week or 2, find new jobs, and get back on their feet. But I had no idea that agreeing without setting a clear time limit would be a mistake. After they moved in, life in the apartment changed immediately. Elena, Travis's wife, and their 2 daughters took over the remaining bedroom. Travis slept on the sofa in the living room. From that point on, the apartment never had a quiet moment. There was always noise, laughing, footsteps running back and forth, toys scattered everywhere, and the constant shouting of the 2 kids from morning until night. There's nothing wrong with children being happy, but in an apartment where I paid the entire monthly rent, the feeling of not having even a small breathing space wore me out faster than I expected. What exhausted me even more was that I didn't see any sign that Travis or Elena were making an effort to leave for nearly a month after they moved in. Every day, I saw them glued to their phones, lying on the sofa, scrolling through social media or watching videos. I once spoke up directly, saying that if they were truly struggling, they should look for work or, at the very least, consider helping with living expenses. But they immediately made excuses. They said they were trying to find a job, looking for something suitable, and told me not to assume that people on their phones were doing nothing. I'm not a hot-headed person, but there was one time I truly lost it and yelled at Travis, telling him he could at least sign up to drive for Uber while waiting for something more stable. He looked at me like I had just insulted his entire existence, then said that kind of job was beneath him and that he couldn't possibly do it. After that, I started spending less time at my apartment after work. On days I finished on time, I stayed longer at the office using the excuse of sorting documents, or I'd stop somewhere for coffee or take a walk to pass the time. If I came home early, I'd avoid sitting in the living room too long, because I knew that the moment I said anything, it would become another endless argument. During that period, I hoped every day that they would find jobs soon and move out. I never expected that they would stay, but my parents would even suggest that I care for them, too. That suggestion came from my dad one late evening, about 2 months after Travis and his family moved in. It was a weekday. I came home early because my mom had asked me to. She said it had been long since the whole family sat down for a proper meal, and that we should at least share one decent dinner to bring warmth back into the home. I got back to the apartment around 6 in the evening. When I opened the door, the pungent smell of food hit me. I stepped in and saw my mom in the kitchen, Elena and Travis on the sofa scrolling through their phones, and the 2 kids running around the living room with a toy that kept playing music nonstop. Dinner that night started peacefully. Everything seemed normal until around 8. While we were having dessert, my dad set his spoon down and began to speak. He said it was time for everyone to sit down and talk clearly about sharing household expenses. As soon as he said that, I nodded. A small part of me felt relieved, thinking he was finally addressing something that should have been discussed long ago. But what he said next left me speechless. He said, "Bennett, your share is $3,500, because you're single." He said it as the decision had already been made, like they were waiting to inform me. At that moment, I tried to stay calm but still had to ask, "Are you serious? I'm already paying $2,200 for the rent on this apartment." Before he could answer, my mom jumped in, her voice firm, without hesitation. "Your father's right. You should contribute another $1,300 for the living expenses." I looked at Travis and Elena. Both of them stayed silent. I asked, "Then what about Travis and Elena? How much are they contributing?" No answer came from Travis. Only my dad responded, louder this time. "Travis and Elena are going through a rough time. Are you going to nickel and dime your own family? You have a job, a stable income, and no one to support. What's wrong with helping out for a few months?" At that point, my blood was boiling. Couldn't hold back anymore. I raised my voice. I agreed to help, but only if they were out looking for work. It's been 2 months. They've stayed home, scrolling through their phones and watching videos. When I suggested Travis drive for Uber, he said it was beneath him. I paused momentarily to catch my breath, then continued, slower and more controlled. "And as for you two, don't forget that for the past 2 years, I've been helping you. Don't ask too much from me. Right now, I'm giving Travis and his family 1 week to move out." After I said that, my dad jumped up from his chair and shouted, "You don't yell at me, and you have no right to yell at your brother. The one who should leave is you, not Travis. You're selfish." I knew everything had started to fall apart the moment he said that. And right after those words, he went quiet. I saw something shift in his eyes. Maybe he realized he had gone too far and shouldn't have said what he did. I didn't argue anymore. I quietly stood up from the table and walked straight to my room. An hour later, I pulled 3 suitcases out of my room. I didn't pack slowly while looking around. I just took what belonged to me: clothes, my laptop, and a few personal items. Before leaving, I stepped into the living room. My dad and Travis were both there. I didn't say a word to them. I began collecting the things I had personally paid for, like the Bluetooth speaker under the TV, the Wi-Fi router I installed because I couldn't stand the poor connection, and the desk lamp next to the sofa. I took them all. Those were mine. I had paid for them. As I reached the door, my mom stood before me. Her voice was panicked. "Let's talk about this calmly. Why do you have to leave right now?" After she said that, I looked at her, then turned to look at my dad and Travis. I spoke loud enough for both of them to hear. "You have 2 sons. I've paid the rent for this apartment for the past 2 years. Now it's his turn." When I said that, I saw something shift in my dad's eyes. Maybe he was about to say something, but then he stayed silent. I didn't wait any longer. I pulled my suitcases out the door, pressed the elevator button, and left. That night, I checked into a nearby hotel. After settling into the room, I opened my laptop and emailed HR, requesting a week off for personal reasons. I didn't know what I was going to do with that week. I knew that after everything that had happened, I no longer belonged in that apartment. The next morning, I went to see Lillian, the building manager where I had been renting the apartment. I scheduled to meet her at the management office on the ground floor to let her know I would be moving out of the 3-bedroom apartment as soon as possible. The lease was under my parents' names, but for the past 2 years, I was the one who paid the rent every single month. That's why I wanted to speak with Lillian directly, so she would understand that my part in that apartment was officially ending that day, financially and in terms of responsibility. I also asked if she could help me find a 1-bedroom unit. The sooner, the better. Some might wonder why the lease had been under my parents' names. The truth is, 2 years ago they were the ones who asked for it that way. They wanted their names on the lease just in case. I got angry and kicked them out one day. Back then, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was ridiculous but didn't want to add more tension, so I agreed to their request. Looking back, I realize I was lucky not to insist on having the lease in my name. If I had, things would be much messier right now. That night, my phone lit up with dozens of calls from my mom and dad. I didn't answer any of them. I left my phone on silent. No ringtone, not even vibration. After dozens of unanswered calls, they started texting. I opened a few of the first messages. Every single one was filled with blame. The first message was from my mom. She wrote, "Are you really that heartless, making your parents cover the rent?" The second message was from my dad. His words were harsher. "You know I only make $2,000 a month. Now, you expect me to pay the whole rent." Then I read through every single message they sent. And in all of those texts, not once did they mention Travis. Not a word about Elena or the 2 kids. No one asked why I left. No one asked where I was or if I was okay. And in that moment, I understood. To them, from beginning to end, it was always about Travis. Right after that, I went into my contacts and blocked them both. I didn't want to be connected to them anymore. A week later, Lillian called me. She said a 1-bedroom apartment had just become available in another building she managed, about a 15-minute drive from the old place. The rent was $1,500 a month. It's not cheap, but reasonable for that area. I didn't hesitate. I went to see the apartment that same day, signed the lease the next morning, and moved in within 3 days. The apartment wasn't big, just enough for one person. But it was clean, organized, had natural light in the morning, and was quiet at night. For me, at that point, that was more than enough. 2 months later, once I had settled in again, work returned to its usual rhythm. My mind felt lighter, and my evenings no longer felt like walking on a tightrope. I received a message from Lillian on a Friday afternoon. She wrote, "Your parents and Travis have moved out of the old apartment. They couldn't keep up with the rent." After reading that message, I sat still for a while. Not because I was shocked, not exactly sad either, just a quiet sense of regret for them. And then, 6 months later, I ran into my cousin, Uncle Adrian, the man my parents had once claimed, talked them into investing in a land project in Florida. They had said it was because they trusted him that they lost all their money, had to sell the house, ended up with nothing, and eventually moved in with me. I had not met him for 2 years to ask about what happened. That day, I was sitting alone at my usual coffee shop, the one I often went to on weekends, when Uncle Adrian suddenly walked in. I thought about slipping away, but he saw me first. We greeted each other and exchanged a few polite questions, and then he pulled out a chair, ordered an espresso, and sat down. Everything seemed casual until he asked, "How are your parents and Travis doing these days? I haven't heard anything from them in the last 2 years." I froze for a moment. In my mind, I had always assumed he was closely involved with them, especially after the investment issue. I asked, "You were still in touch with them?" He shook his head and said it had been over 2 years since he'd heard anything. So I told him what had happened, how my parents moved in with me, Travis and his family came after, and how I eventually left. After a few minutes of silence, I asked him directly, "What happened with that land investment in Florida?" And then he told me something no one had ever told me in over 2 years. He said he wasn't the one who first brought up the land project and convinced my parents to invest in everything. It was Travis. He had introduced the deal, saying it was a guaranteed win, based on what he had heard from friends. Uncle Adrian heard about it later, got pulled into the group, and lost everything. The only difference was he didn't blame anyone, and he didn't use it to lean on anyone for help. When I heard that, I didn't say anything. I just stared at my cup of coffee, now cold, and in my mind, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. All the small details over the years, from how my parents always defended Travis to their strange silence whenever I asked about the money they lost, suddenly made perfect sense. And that was the first time I realized I had been in the wrong role in my family's story for a long time. After meeting Uncle Adrian, I didn't dwell on it too much. I didn't call my parents, and I didn't call Travis to verify anything. My life went on once again in peace. I got promoted, got a raise, my career moved in the right direction, and most importantly, I lived in a mind space with clear boundaries that no one had the right to cross anymore. And then, a year ago, I bought my first apartment. It was a small place, just enough, but it was mine. I haven't reached out to my family for the past 4 years, and they haven't reached out to me. Not a single call, not a single message. I used to think maybe they understood. Or, at the very least, they realized there was nothing left they could ask me. But then, 1 month ago, I got a message from the front desk at my office. My mother was waiting downstairs in the lobby. That sentence made me pause for a few seconds. Not because I was emotional, but I couldn't understand what would bring her here after all these years. I reluctantly went down to meet her. Not wanting to have a conversation in the lobby, I took her to a nearby cafe. It was a familiar place where I usually spent quiet weekend mornings reading. After a few polite questions like, "Where are you living these days? And how's work?" she started to cry. She said my father was seriously ill, then pulled out a stack of papers, including hospital invoices and a handwritten list of expenses they needed help with. The total came to nearly $18,000. After reading through the papers, I didn't say much. I just nodded, took out my phone, opened my contacts, and wrote something on the paper before her. It was the phone number of a nonprofit organization that helps uninsured patients. Then I said, "They can help guide you through the process. But this isn't something I can help with." And I sat there, waiting while she folded the papers, wiped her tears, and got up to leave the cafe. That night I couldn't sleep. After she came to see me that morning and asked for help, even though I had turned her down, something inside me still felt unsettled. No matter how far I had come, they were still the people who brought me into this world. Whether I liked it or not, that thought kept surfacing, like a reflex programmed into me since childhood. But then I remembered what happened years ago, when they created that story about Uncle Adrian, persuading them to invest, when the truth turned out to be the opposite. And in that moment, it felt like my mind snapped back into clarity. I realized I couldn't trust anything they said. I called Uncle Adrian that same night. It was probably around 11 o'clock. When he answered, I asked, "Have my parents contacted you in the past few days to ask for help?" He paused for a few seconds, then replied calmly, "Yes, they called me a week ago, but 3 days ago, I discovered they had already received support from a local nonprofit. That group covered your dad's medical bills." As soon as I heard that, a fire of anger lit up. No more doubt, no more guilt over whether I had been too cold. Only the absolute certainty that I had just been lied to once again. I thanked Uncle Adrian and hung up. Then I opened my contacts and searched for my mother's number, the one I had blocked. I just hoped she hadn't changed it. And she hadn't. After 2 rings, she answered. Before I could say anything, she babbled, her voice urgent and desperate. "Bennett, you changed your mind, didn't you? You'll help me, right?" I replied immediately, every word cold and clear. "I know Dad got help from a charity 3 days ago. Don't ever come to me again. Tomorrow, I'm contacting a lawyer to request a no-contact order against both of you." I didn't wait for a response. I hung up. Then, I blocked her number again. I didn't ask why she did it, because by that point I knew whatever the reason was, it no longer mattered. After everything, I learned a lesson. Not about forgiveness, family, or boundaries. If I don't set limits for myself, there will always be someone who sees that space as an open door, steps in, pushes me back little by little, and assumes I have to endure it. Not everyone who calls themselves family understands what fairness means. And not everyone who gave me life has the right to remain in it, no matter what role they once played. I used to think staying silent was how to keep everything from falling apart. But in the end, I realized some people will take that silence and use it to push further, to justify the hurt they cause, and to assume I'll always come back, always forgive. I walked away, not because I hated anyone, but because I knew if I stayed, I wouldn't be myself anymore. My biggest lesson is this: we don't get to choose where we're born, but we all have the right to decide how we grow. And I chose to grow by walking away from the place that always treated me like a backup plan. And before I wrap up this story, I want to ask you, the ones who've stayed with me to the very end, if you were in my shoes that day, being asked to contribute $3,500 just because you're single and not supporting anyone, what would you have done? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share this story with anyone struggling to find the line between responsibility and self-respect. Thank you for listening.